Could everybody take their seats, please, so we can begin this lovely evening? I'm Monica Heller. I'm the president-elect. No, could you turn on the lights, please? Leith asked for no light dimming. And Leith gets what she wants tonight. So before we begin, our colleague and member Alice Kehoe has asked to say a few words.
A number of us senior anthropologists remember very vividly, and we're thinking, this is the 50th anniversary of the AAA meeting that was in progress in San Francisco when Kennedy was assassinated. So 50 years ago exactly, we were all sitting in meeting rooms in a hotel in San Francisco. People were presenting their papers. The doors of the meeting rooms were closed for the presentations. Suddenly, all over the meeting rooms area, doors were thrown open. Lights were flashed on if the rooms were darkened. And whoever threw the door open in each room called out, "The president has been shot." We all got up. We didn't know what to do. We all went out. We went out into the lobby. All the anthropologists were milling around, and gradually we all drifted into the main ballroom, wondering, can this be true? Couldn't be true. But what should we do? And then Margaret Mead stomped up to the platform. She waved her famous staff. She said, "Now, more than ever, anthropology is important. We must use our knowledge to work towards an end to such terrible events. This meeting will go on." And the schedule of the papers was resumed. And we just thought we would like to bring that historic moment back exactly 50 years later. Thank you.
Thank you for that timely and I think in many ways prescient commentary. So it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Leith Mullings to this audience, although most of you don't need the introduction, on the occasion of her presidential address. At several moments over the past few weeks, she's referred to it as the dreaded presidential address. But for me, and I think for you, it's more likely the highly anticipated presidential address. Leith might appear at first glance to be quiet and unassuming, but of course she has an intellect like a laser beam and an unwavering commitment to social justice. Put those together and stand back. What you'll hear tonight is likely to stay with you for a long time. It's particularly fitting that we're gathered to listen to what she has to say in Chicago, the place where Leith came to do anthropology and discovered how anthropology is tied to social movements, movements for democracy, movements for social justice, movements against racism. This link, this intertwining, this inseparable dialectic is, for me at any rate, Leith's signature. And for the past 2 years, she's shown us how it's done. We need only to look at the titles of her anthropology news columns: Increasing Anthropology's Visibility, Introducing Open Anthropology, New Engagements, Inequality Within, Communication, Engagement, and Outreach, and of course, Trayvon Martin, Race and Anthropology, to which her 1 week of vacation was given over, and which serves as a model of how anthropology helps understand, explain, and speak at the right time, in the right way. Allow me to quote 2 sentences, each from a different column, and no, you don't have to guess which sentence is from which column. We can play that game at the bar later. The first, slightly edited for a general audience, is this: while the AAA has made a major contribution to addressing the racial ideologies of the world that anthropologists help to make, what we have not always done so well is to demonstrate that though race is socially constructed, racism is a lethal social reality, constraining the potential, if not threatening the lives, of millions of people. The second is, while it's true that anthropological knowledge competes with other, more powerful forces, and that the translation of academic research into accessible formats is a major challenge, it's a challenge that should and must be met. These two provide a combined strong message for us to remember. As anthropologists, we're responsible for the knowledge we produce. We're in the conversation and better learn how to talk to all those whose lives intersect with ours and the issues that we work on. Which knowledges and which responsibilities might vary to some extent, but they must always include the consequential concepts for which anthropology has been most responsible, race foremost among them, most particularly where it has historically been the central principle for structuring inequality. Leith is, as many of you know, Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at the City University of New York Graduate Center. Although Chicago has played an important role in her life, it seems to me that Leith is really a New Yorker. Albeit with a softened and frankly more effective version of the accent and the in-your-faceness for which New Yorkers are famous. CUNY claims not just her, but practically her entire family, from her father and siblings to her daughter. So CUNY is certainly proud of her, although I imagine maybe Leith would like to think they don't own her completely. Leith grew up in New York, trained as a nurse in New York. That was for me, and I did not know that moment. Went off to become an anthropologist in Chicago and went back to establish a career in New York. That career, so far, it ain't over yet, has been characterized by both breadth and depth, always through the lenses of the African diaspora, the intersections of race, class, and gender, and the dynamics of oppression and resistance. This has led both to local involvements, for example, in the African burial grounds and in Harlem, and to international ties, notably with a focus on Ghana and Brazil. Her initial interest in health has also been an important thread in her work, with a focus on health disparities as produced by relations of inequality. Studies of such phenomena as gentrification and social movements are elements of her overarching concerns to understand the dynamics of oppression and to use that understanding to resist them. She says she uses feminist and critical race theory. I think she is feminist and critical race theory. She's the author, co-author, editor, and co-editor of 8 books, most recently her edited volume, New Social Movements in the African Diaspora, Challenging Global Apartheid, which was published in 2009. She has published influential articles in such journals as Transforming Anthropology and Souls, a critical journal of Black politics, culture, and society. Her 2005 piece in the Annual Review Anthropology on interrogating racisms towards an anti-racist anthropology is a key reference. Also, rumor has it she's a great scholar and teacher. Great teacher and supervisor, sorry. She certainly has been wonderful to work with in her role as AAA president. She announced to me right away that her leadership style is collaborative, and she's been more than true to her word. With me and with the rest of the executive board, she has consistently and carefully built a shared agenda, constructing us as a team with a common goal, which is no small achievement in an organization as large and varied and sometimes fractious as ours is. She listens particularly attentively and carefully. I know ethnographers are good at that, but she's really good at that. Then she makes up her mind and moves us forward. And somehow she manages to be passionate and pragmatic at the same time. She can make the distinction between what is ideal and what is possible, and keeps her eye on making sure the AAA remains the inclusive home for anthropology it should be. And even if she loves a good, shall we say, heated debate as much as the rest of us, she also knows that we accomplish most when we speak with a united voice. On a personal note, I'll miss our weekly phone calls, though I can't promise to give them up entirely, so if the phone rings at 3 p.m. on a Monday, you'll know who it is looking for a reality check. You've taught me a great deal about elegant leadership and about the value of sanity. Most importantly, you've helped me think about voice. Speaking of which, I think it's time for me to close mine down and to let you have yours. So, chers collègues, chers amis, let us now hear what Leith has to say about how, and maybe why, anthropology matters.
Thank you, Monica, for that wonderful introduction. And I actually wanted to say that some of you know that when I stepped into the presidency, not the pregnancy, the presidency, it was a rather difficult time in my life. And Monica was very supportive. The staff was very supportive, and all of you were very supportive. I didn't get trouble from anybody, and that's pretty unusual. And I want to thank all of you for that and the fact that we were able to move forward. We hold this meeting during the 150-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, of the 50th anniversary of the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, nearly 50 years after the initial protests against the war in Vietnam, and in the year of the demise of the Defense of Marriage Act. This moment, then, provides us with an opportunity for reflection about anthropology and its publics, particularly since the underlying issues of race and racism on one hand, and anthropologists' war, violence, and ethics on the other, continue to have resonance in the discipline. This evening I will discuss my vision of why anthropology matters, emphasizing the relationship between anthropology and recent social movements. I will first suggest that anthropology has been significantly influenced by its context. Second, that sites of resistance and activism, which may develop into collective actions and social movements, have been important spaces for generating anthropological theory, especially for the development of counter-hegemonic theory, this counter-hegemonic stream in the US anthropology. And third, that anthropological theory and methodology are uniquely positioned to make a decisive contribution to solving human problems through education, advocacy, and helping to empower subaltern groups. Despite the attacks on the humanities and social sciences, my view is that anthropology, the science of humankind, is not in crisis. Rather, it is at the brink of significant opportunities as we continue to grapple with the last phrase in Section 1 of the Association's 1983 Statement of Purpose, the dissemination of anthropological knowledge and its use to solve human problems. Tonight, drawing primarily, but not exclusively, on examples from the anthropology of the US, I will briefly sketch out some of the key social contexts and movements that had a significant impact on anthropology in the recent past, and then discuss the challenges and opportunities that anthropology confronts today. In keeping with the meeting theme of current engagements, future publics, I will briefly describe two projects that demonstrate how sites of activism can shape anthropological theory, and how in turn anthropological theory and methods can potentially contribute to these endeavors, engaging future publics. Finally, I will explore some preliminary ideas about what anthropology's future publics might look like. The 1963 March on Washington was one dramatic example of the African American ongoing freedom struggle. As a student, I watched with horror as civil rights activists were beaten and attacked with dogs and fire hoses, as children and young people braved angry and dangerous mobs to go to school, and as 4 little girls were killed when their church in Mississippi was bombed. As I enrolled in Queens College of the city of New York, freedom riders, many of whom were students who rode buses through the segregated South, described the attacks and bombings. In fact, Andrew Goodman, one of the 3 civil rights workers brutally murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where they had gone to investigate a church bombing, had been a student at Queens College, a classmate of Paul Simon, and an anthropology major. Against this background, I took my first course in anthropology, Anthropology 101, taught by someone unknown to me at the time named Hortense Powdermaker. And she did not look like that when I took the course. In one session about values, she discussed the traditional American values of freedom, equality, and liberty. With images of the beatings, burnings, and murders on my mind, I asked how freedom and equality could be described as American values. As she explained the importance of anthropology's methodological distinction between what people say and what they do, I was impressed by anthropology's commitment to turn its lens not only on that which is manifest, but also to analyze that which is concealed. I compared this to my sociology class, where they were holding fast to the universalism of American values. And my daughter, the sociologist, would like to say boo, and I said, but she'll get another chance. Okay. As a 16-year-old, I got a taste of empowerment through knowledge and began to see that this broad and exciting discipline that encompassed the study of humankind and engaged the issues of the world could be attractive to me. Though it is terribly politically incorrect these days, I must admit that I was also fascinated by Dr. Powdermaker's accounts of dancing with the natives in Melanesia and the glee with which she contemplated how shocked her family would have been. I thought, wow, that's a good way to shock your family. I did not know much about her at the time, but I was later to find out that she had an unusual history, working as a labor organizer before going on to graduate school. After working in present-day Papua New Guinea, she conducted fieldwork in an African-American community in Indianola, Mississippi, which became the basis for her book, After Freedom, A Cultural Study in the Deep South, published in 1939. She was part of a tradition of scholars, including Allison Davis, who engaged fairly on with the inequalities of U.S. society. But what I found most compelling about anthropology was the search for explanation, not merely description. Anthropology mattered to me because at its best, it is premised on the view that the circumstances that surrounded me at the time, war, violence, racism, and poverty, were not natural or given. The conditions under which they emerged could be understood through comparative and historical analysis. In other words, anthropology mattered because it offered theoretical perspectives and methodological approaches that could uncover relationships of power and structures of inequality. As such, it held out the promise that if the conditions under which these human problems arose could be known, they could also be addressed. I was later to learn that the intellectual work done by participants in post-World War II anti-colonial wars and the U.S. Black Freedom Movement provided the context and the stimulus for anthropology to revise its views on race, colonialism, and inequality. As you know, despite some important exceptions, early anthropology fostered and nurtured scientific racism. This was a worldview that transformed certain perceived differences into genetically determined inequality and provided the rationale for slavery, colonialism, segregation, and eugenics. Building on the earlier contestations of race by U.S. activists and scholars, such as Ida B. Wells, Marcus Garvey, couldn't leave out Marcus Garvey, Oliver Cromwell Cox, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Irene Diggs, the anthropologist who worked very closely with Du Bois. The post-war context produced scholars and organic intellectuals such as Frantz Fanon and leaders of liberation movements such as Aimé Césaire and Eric Williams, author of Capitalism and Slavery. These organic intellectuals reflected on the relationship of history, knowledge, and power, but were also actors, creating theory from practice. Way before post-colonial studies, Amilcar Cabral, the assassinated leader of the liberation movement of Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, described the way in which the dominant group's power to represent the history and culture of subaltern groups was critical in achieving and maintaining domination, a point to which I will return in the case studies. Later anthropologists, such as Bernard Magubani, an exiled member of the South African National Congress, were among the first to deconstruct the notion of tribe. What was most important about these scholars that distinguished their work from later postmodern critiques was their knowledge of real social movements and their emphasis on linking knowledge production to structures of power. Their analyses and criticisms were later reflected in Catherine Goff's work, especially in her well-known article, Anthropology is the Handmaiden of Colonialism, as well as volumes by Del Hymes and Talal Asad. As the post-World War II consequences of racism became all too clear, and in the face of challenges raised by the Black freedom struggle and the wars of liberation, several anthropologists, in particular Franz Boas, Ruth Benedict, Jean Weltfish, and Ashley Montague, participated actively in shaping new ideas of race in anthropology. Some were involved in developing the UNESCO document, The Race Question. In working to disavow popular concepts of race and racial hierarchies, they were later joined by biological anthropologists such as Sherwood Washburn and Frank Livingston. These new anthropological perspectives about race emerging out of anti-racist struggles also supported the work of activists, most notably in the public school desegregation cases. The best known, Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, made segregation illegal in public schools for the first time. Ethnographic work in Chicago, Elena Padilla's classic work on Puerto Rican migrants, and St. Clair Drake and Horace Caton's Black Metropolis further challenged popular views of race. Chicago. This contradictory city of workers' struggles, of the 1886 Haymarket affair in which a bomb was tossed into a crowd of workers demonstrating for an 8-hour day, but also the city where Martin Luther King was hit by a brick as he marched through the Chicago streets, figured prominently in the theorization of the subaltern and the struggles in which they engaged. While the University of Chicago was dominated by modernization theorists and symbolic anthropology during the years I was there, Martin Luther King was assassinated and a fledgling Black Power movement was being systematically destroyed by the state under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. It was in Chicago that Fred Hampton, the 17-year-old leader of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, was assassinated by the police as he slept in his apartment. The violence at home mirrored the violence abroad. The Vietnam War was raging, and the anti-war movement was in full swing. Pivotal points of the anti-war demonstration occurred at the Democratic National Convention held in Chicago in 1968 and the subsequent trial of the Chicago Eight. Those of you who saw pictures or remember will recall that Bobby Seale, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, was gagged and bound in the courtroom, a fitting metaphoric image that traveled around the world. The association was deeply divided, not only about support for the Vietnam War, but about ethics and the role of anthropologists in warfare. The war and wide-scale protests prompted anthropologists to consider ethical questions, such as reflected in the 1971 Mead Report. The report condemned Eric Wolf and Joseph Jorgensen for publicly stating that anthropologists who allowed their work to be used to support counterinsurgency efforts violated the ethics of the association. The Mead Report sanctioning Wolf and Jorgensen was later rejected by the membership, section by section. The anti-war movement generated teach-ins and prompted anthropologists to reflect on war and violence. This appeared in such scholarship as the Anthropology of Armed Conflict and Rebellion, edited by Morton Freed, Martin Harris, and Robert Murphy. In addition, anthropologists began to study peasants with a view towards their revolutionary potential. Recently, the association has revisited these issues about ethics, anthropology, and war in reference to the human terrain system, prompting a new AAA statement of ethics in 2012. The social movements of the 60s and the 1970s had repercussions for access to the academy. The post-World War II GI Bill of Rights made college education available to white working-class men for the first time. But it was the civil rights, Black Power, Native American, Latino, and feminist social movements that decades later created the context for greater access for women and people of color. Newly formed departments of labor and social history, ethnic and gender studies provided a space for challenging the traditional paradigms. Alternative knowledge production, arising from collective movements and often nurtured in these newly formed departments, centered on the analysis of power asymmetries and their material reality. This new scholarship profoundly influenced almost all of the social sciences and the humanities, and for anthropologists, significantly transformed the way in which we study society. For example, the feminist movement was the context for a remarkable body of work. This intervention revolutionized anthropological theory, which in turn made critical contributions to the feminist movement. Eleanor Leacock's groundbreaking introduction to Engels, the family, the state, and private property not only stimulated several canonic volumes, one of which we heard about at the awards ceremony last night, interrogating gender and society, but challenged the very foundation of anthropology. Furthermore, Leacock's work, which suggested that gender inequality developed with class stratification, also provided women in the feminist movement with grounds for challenging biological reductionism. Additional movement came from the growing body of work by and about women of color and working class women, such as the Combahee River Collective Statement. These analyses, which emerged from political struggles, complicated theoretical approaches to class and gender. But perhaps more important, they exposed the variety of women's experiences. One example was African Americans' consistent role as workers, in which enslaved women often did the same work as men in the field, were always in the workforce, and were important contributors to household income, defying the current image of the woman in the home. This data provided further ammunition for the political quest to deconstruct imaginary formulations of gender and women's history. Just as the Cuban Revolution significantly influenced Latin American scholars, these social movements played an important role in reigniting the oppositional stream of engaged or activist anthropology in the US, spotlighting the important issues of difference, inequality, and power. Despite the courageous work of many anthropologists, as David Price suggests, the infamous McCarthy period, in which the careers of progressive anthropologists were destroyed by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, was quite successful in driving attention to inequality, power, and activism underground. As Eric Wolf said in his 1989 distinguished lecture, we have been timid in building upon what we know. The backlash against the civil rights, Black Power, and other social movements further shaped anthropological theory about inequality, race, class, gender, and ideology. As the civil rights movement advanced, particularly as it sought to address poverty across racial lines, everywhere else in the world known as class, it was confronted with the culture of poverty ideological explanations. These were formulated by social scientists, anthropologist Oscar Lewis, working in Puerto Rico and New York, being the best-known example, and implemented at the highest level of government. In short, policymakers chose to emphasize culture rather than structure as the primary factor producing inequality. People were poor not because of structural racism and class inequality, but rather because of their inferior culture passed down from generation to generation. This notion of culture as static, homogeneous, and unchanging did the work of biological race in explaining inequality as the fault of individuals or groups. Not only was this blame the victim approach contested by activists, but several anthropologists such as Eleanor Leacock, Charles and Betty Valentine, and Del Jones urged a reconsideration of anthropology's core concept of culture, one that rejected the Boasian boundedness and lack of engagement with power. In turn, the scholarship produced by these anthropologists assisted ongoing collective actions. For example, one of the first topics introduced to students in Anthropology 101 is kinship, where they learn that there is no such thing as the natural family, but a wide variety of household and kinship forms which emerge and are transformed in particular social and historical contexts. This perspective stood in sharp contrast to that of sociologists, boo, and later Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan's characterization of the Black family as pathological. During this period, anthropologists did important work documenting the variety of forms and functions in U.S. families, providing important evidence with which to confront the ideological misapprehensions that dominated policymaking. In summary, this new body of scholarship laid the intellectual foundation to challenge the general curriculum, for contesting how knowledge is defined, created, and controlled, and for making the experience of women, workers, and people of color central to the analysis. Perhaps most important was the unity of theory and practice from which these subaltern formulations emerged. They expanded the boundaries of anthropologists' knowledge of inequality while simultaneously contesting it. In these decades, social movements and collective actions were important sites for generation of anthropological theory. Anthropology mattered. Within the context of social movements, anthropologists created theory that explained and helped to advance these movements. In the US, by the mid-1980s, many of the mass movements that had anchored activist work had been targeted by the state for repression or declined as a result of internal contradictions. The consequences of Reaganism and the onset of neoliberalism profoundly affected so many of the people studied by anthropologists. Though social movements had not entirely disappeared, in the US they often took the form of service organizations or more local protests, for example, tenants movements and struggles against lack of affordable housing, neighborhood gentrification, and police brutality. These local actions were studied by a growing number of anthropologists specializing in the US. As wars of maneuver became wars of position, anthropologists developed important theoretical interventions, often challenging traditional views about resistance and social movements. However, in the US, the overarching social movements that had confronted traditional paradigms about inequality, power, racism, and knowledge declined. Within the academy, the retreat from affirmative action in student and faculty recruitment was explained or rationalized by post-racialism or colorblindness, in other words, the denial of the continued existence of entrenched structural racism. Along with the expulsion of radical faculty and the elimination of many women's and ethnic studies departments, these developments contributed to the decline of activist social theory. Simultaneously, the postmodern turn, while exposing some important shortcomings of the traditional canon, tended to neutralize the study of power and again dampen the activist trend in anthropology. The rise of uncritical multiculturalism in its various forms, including liberal, neoliberal, and corporate multiculturalism, and its political partner diversity, often presented a counterpoint to the study of the material base of inequality. However, as anthropologists, we sometimes missed important opportunities. Hindsight is always 20/20, but anthropologists might have done well to forcefully reclaim the concept of culture from its many revisionists and assertively advance a more dynamic culture concept grounded in economy and power. In addition, as subaltern people forged corrective histories that included their experiences, we often conflated this work with anti-science perspectives. To analyze the politics of knowledge production and to address the hegemonic view of history is not to suggest that all narratives are equal, nor is it to suggest that history and science do not exist. Since the 1980s, the Academy has been undergoing radical reconstruction, with market ideologies increasingly determining how teaching, knowledge, and values are produced, assessed, and disseminated. Mindful of the debates as to whether we are living in a neoliberal or a post-neoliberal epoch, what we do know is that with the emergence of a new economy, the terrain of society, the academy, and anthropology has been reconfigured in momentous ways, presenting both challenges and opportunities for anthropology. While fortunately approximately half of all PhD anthropologists work outside the academy, because we are all trained in the academy, these transformations affect us all. Leaving aside for the moment the rise for profit institutions, because that would just be too far to go, the context in which we produce knowledge is being drastically transformed through corporatization and, in the case of public universities, privatization. In the US, the broader context in which we operate is one of a vocal right wing, famously anti-intellectual, but ironically moving rapidly into the academy through the proliferation of think tanks, institutes, and student groups. We experience unrelenting attacks on the social sciences. Public investment in higher education is at its lowest point in more than a quarter century, leading public universities to increasingly seek market solutions. Entering into joint ventures with private corporations. Greater numbers of presidents of major research institutions, both public and private, sit on corporate boards. In 2006, more than half of all presidents of public doctoral granting institutions sat on at least one corporate board. So what, you might ask? But consider this. Inside Higher Education reports that as part of the plan for J.P. Morgan Chase to donate $17 million to start a doctoral program at the University of Delaware, J.P. Morgan employees would be able to advise the university about which faculty members should teach in the program and J.P. Morgan employees, and listen to this, would be able to sit on dissertation committees. Okay? Other manifestations of neoliberalism or corporatization include the rise of a flexible labor force or contingent workers. In the drive to reduce costs, the academic workforce has been rapidly transformed right under our very noses. The shift from full-time tenured supported faculty to under-supported part-time contingent workers has been proceeding at a rapid rate all over the world. In the US, 73% of the instructional workforce, the majority of whom are part-time or full-time adjuncts, work off the tenure track, a number that has doubled since 1970. Today, 75% of all classes in the US are taught by adjuncts. Compensation rates for adjunct faculty nationwide average approximately $2,700 per 3-credit course. And then there are disparities by race and by type of institution. In addition to the exploitation of our college and students, other issues should concern us. With so many of our colleagues unable to count on academic freedom, what does this mean for the discipline's ability to tackle the controversial and important issues we have historically addressed? Along with the loss of academic freedom, in many universities, faculty have been gradually losing control not only of the curriculum, but also of their own intellectual property, often through privatization by the university. The appropriation of patents, copyrights of books, articles, and products has been going on for some time and is a complicated issue, but increasingly educational materials such as syllabi are now the private property of universities and in certain formats used to generate profits. And of course, one of the most egregious and outrageous developments is the precipitous rise in student indebtedness as they attempt to purchase knowledge now so necessary for advancement in a for-profit context. Similar developments are taking place in other parts of the world. In some European countries where public universities are more often the norm, the academy is becoming increasingly corporatized. State reforms of universities, which may involve restructuring of the entire public sector, are often tied to accountability. In Marilyn Strathern's words, an audit culture. What began as an assessment model quickly led to reliance on the impact factor of citations and metrics of questionable value are now used to determine hiring, salary, and promotions. The good news is that despite the influence of the World Bank, Latin American universities present a more mixed picture, with some countries such as Brazil experiencing an expansion of access to universities across race and class lines. And I know after the speech, Bella's going to come up and tell me that's not true. But from what I've read, it's true. Okay. The revolutions in informational technology, publishing, and knowledge dissemination produce major changes in how knowledge is delivered. MOOCs, massive open online courses, are currently being offered free or at relatively low cost to students. Some universities develop their own, others work in partnership with companies such as Coursera and the nonprofit edX that provide the online interactive platforms. The largest provider, Coursera, claims 5 million students all over the world. Proponents argue that MOOCs have the potential to broaden and increase access to higher education by offering students courses at a low cost. However, there are a number of issues. Among them, who gets to build MOOCs, and how does that limit the type and range of knowledge produced? MOOCs are very expensive to produce, and it is likely that elite universities will have the edge. Popular with administrators because they offer an opportunity to cut costs, the fact that there will be fewer full-time faculty is obvious. But even the Wall Street Journal has given them a mixed grade. How would MOOCs, should they catch on, restructure higher education? How would this change the pedagogical encounter? What happens when teaching and learning cease to be a social, interactive experience? What are the political implications for a dispersed student body unable to engage in collective actions? What does this mean for anthropology? I don't know, but I'm going to raise some questions. Who will be teaching and who will be learning? Can open access be put into place in a way that democratizes knowledge, or will it stratify and narrow knowledge production through author fees? What is clear is that there are significant transformations in the way knowledge is produced and disseminated, with intriguing possibilities for the democratization of knowledge, but also for unprecedented control. At the same time, advances in technology and digital media present new media portals for disseminating knowledge and providing new openings for reaching new publics. Recognizing the different kinds of anthropology we do, new engagements and new publics are key to our survival as a discipline, a position many practicing anthropologists have been clear about. The last set of presidential addresses and distinguished lectures in anthropology clearly emphasized, almost all of them, the need to reach new publics and engage with them. In 1992, Roy Rappaport; in 1995, James Peacock; in 2009, Sethel Lowe; in 2010, Jeremy Sabloff, all called for greater public engagement. A similar process seems to be going on in our sister disciplines. Michael Borroway's 2004 presidential address to the American Sociological Association noted, "The challenge for sociology is to engage multiple publics in multiple ways." Are you going to cheer? Okay. I might add that this is a particularly U.S. problem and a topic about which we can learn much from our international colleagues, for many of whom public intellectuals are the norm, and there is not a division between the society and the academy. The good news is that anthropology, which, as I have demonstrated, has always engaged in publics, is heeding the message, engaging new, old, and unusual publics. Inside and outside the academy, anthropologists are fully engaged in work as diverse as climate change, cultural heritage, disaster relief, financial markets, language and social justice, health and illness, to name only a few. Most important, the association is now poised to help anthropologists shape the debates, not merely to react to them, and I urge us all to get involved. Despite the alarming state of the academy, anthropologists continue research in which the study of power is central and anthropology really matters. I will briefly discuss two projects that embrace the dialectic of theory production and forms of engagement, collaboration, advocacy, and activism. In comparison to the 60s and the 70s, these projects demonstrate the ways in which anthropology must expand and reinvent itself as we generate innovative anthropological theory and methodology through collaborative approaches. At the same time, the issues our publics seek to address often require the distinctive comparative and historical hallmark of anthropology to illuminate the issues that real people face. The first is a research project initiated by Pamela Kaya and Charles Hale. Neoliberal transformations and increased dispossession I have described with respect to the university more greatly affect people all over the world. In the past 2 decades, both in the US and Latin America, race relations appeared to have been improving. In the US, we elected Barack Obama, an African-American president, and in Bolivia, an indigenous activist, Evo Morales, was elected president. Furthermore, several countries in Latin America have taken a multicultural turn in recognizing indigenous and Afro-descended people. However, in many areas, including the US, the incidence and severity of racist violence against African-descended and indigenous people and the number of racist hate groups appears to be increasing, and so do the number of murders. The infamous Sucre incident is an example. On May 24th, 2008, in the context of major constitutional change, President Evo Morales of Bolivia was scheduled to visit the city of Sucre. Mobs armed with sticks and explosives captured more than 24 indigenous peasants, beating and humiliating them. After forcing them to walk to the House of Liberty, where the first Bolivian constitution was written in 1825, the indigenous peasants were forced to kneel half-naked in the square and apologize for coming to the city to hear President Morales. In these contexts, observatories against racial discrimination in the Americas emerged to address both the well-publicized incidents and the vast majority that remain untold. Taking advantage of these observatories, Charlie Hale and Pamela Kaya conceived a project to form a network linking observatories in 5 Latin American countries: Guatemala, Bolivia, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and the US. Composed of Afro-descended and indigenous people and their allies, these observatories are committed to engaging in sustained comparative research, to analyzing its implications for anti-racist strategies, and to training young scholars to lead these efforts in the future. The Inter-American Foundation funded the first capacity-building component of the network, and there have been 5 meetings in the US, Bolivia, Colombia, and Brazil, the last focused on intersectionality, where representatives of each observatory have shared experience and planned research. Engaging critical race theory developed in both the North and the South, the research goal is to compare the manifestations of racism, the effectiveness of strategies used to combat it, coalitional politics, and the role of the state across these 5 countries. Mindful of the contextual differences as well as the continuities, the research will address such important questions as: how do we explain the persistence of racial hierarchies? Have movements for change reached the limits of multicultural democracy? How do we analyze dispossession and the changing face of the racial state, emerging class structures, and the new racism? What can be learned through comparison between the US and Latin America? Why does anthropology matter here? Deploying anthropological approaches of comparison and collaboration to their best advantage, the research is a quintessential example of what anthropological approaches can yield, generating important new theoretical perspectives on race and racism and providing knowledge that can empower subaltern populations. The second project I'd like to briefly mention is the New York African Burial Ground. It was discovered in Lower Manhattan in 1987, and in 2010, the National Park Service asked Donna Davis and I to conduct an ethno-historical study of the community activists who worked to preserve and memorialize the site. In order to describe and analyze this 10-year process of marches, protests, and direct action, we interviewed key participants, analyzed archival connections, and reviewed historical records. The story of the African Burial Ground is a long and fascinating one, which I hope you will be able to read soon. But here I'd like to underscore the ways in which this collective action contributed to and sharpened anthropological theory and methodologies, and in turn, how anthropology helped to empower the research subjects. The first priority the first priority of community activists, identifying themselves as the descendants of the interred, was preservation of the site. Furthermore, they were adamant that the research concerning the site should be directed by scholars with some knowledge of the African diaspora, and that they, the dissent community, would have a say in shaping the research process. Dr. Michael Blakey, at the time one of the very few African-American biological anthropologists in the U.S., became the scientific director. Ultimately, the African burial ground was a groundbreaking, so to speak, with respect to its methodological innovations. The interracial and interdisciplinary team included historians, cultural anthropologists, and artists, as well as archaeologists, biologists, and biocultural and physical anthropologists. The team adopted a biocultural approach that, as Michael Blakey put it, quote, combines cultural and historical information with demography and epidemiology of archaeological populations to verify, augment, or critique the socioeconomic conditions and processes experienced by past human communities. One of the most important methodological contributions was a new standard of community collaboration and democratization of knowledge. The project was collaborative from its inception. Rather than posing the questions to be asked, the researchers involved the community in helping to frame the questions. As a result, together the research and the dissent community developed questions about the origins, quality of life, rituals, and modes of resistance. The new practices and approaches developed at the African burial ground, in particular the diasporic framework, are now being applied to the study of other African burial grounds. And the project is a model for public engagement in research. In turn, the use of anthropology empowered the dissent community. When Donna Davis and I interviewed the participants in 2010 and 2011, after 20 years, they were still extremely emotional about the experience, and several of our interviewees cried while telling their stories, pounded on the table, and were just extremely emotional about why they had devoted 10 to 20 years of their lives to this effort. They were well aware of the common practice of destroying and misrepresenting African American history and felt strongly that saving the burial ground was an important intervention. As Amilcar Cabral has noted, and many of our respondents agreed, the power to control history is also the power to control not only the narrative of the past, but to transform the future. The power to produce, reproduce, and control knowledge. Perhaps one of the strongest and most poignant hopes surrounding the African burial ground concerned the role it could play in shaping a younger generation. Tara Morrison, the 30-something-year-old former National Park Service supervisor of the site, discussed the discomfort of being a black student in an all-white high school, where she was subjected to, as she said, stupid questions like, how does it feel to be a slave? She told us, I always said I wanted to be in a position where I could help to make sure no other child had to feel that way. And so my commitment is to make sure that this story gets out, and that it gets out in a way that people know that there was slavery in New York. It's about empowerment, and it's about what these people went through and how we survived and are here today, and the efforts that it took to preserve this site so that we don't have to be ashamed of that history. The importance of these projects lies not merely in their results, but in the questions they raise for anthropology and the ways in which they reshape anthropology's boundaries with respect to theory, methodology, collaboration, and empowering people through knowledge. Looking toward future publics, why should anthropology matter to them? Demographic shifts will be significant. In the US, it is estimated that by 2042, non-Hispanic whites will no longer be in the majority. US anthropology will be informed by new demographics and new social concerns, or perhaps old social concerns and new contexts. We see new collective actions We see new collective actions around immigration reform, protests against state violence, and Occupy. Despite anthropology's very checkered history on a range of subjects, at its best, it can provide the theoretical perspectives and methodological tools to analyze the complex challenges of a rapidly changing world. As James Peacock said, society needs anthropology. If anthropology did not exist, it would have to be invented. At the same time, it is likely that these new publics will influence how we practice anthropology in developing theoretical constructs that make the study of power central, that attend to the pluralities of anthropologies, from oppositional streams in the US to world anthropologies, to diverse views within all national anthropologies, and to knowledge production by our research subjects. And finally, our methodological approaches, or as Saskia Saskin put it, our analytic tactics, will have to be deeply collaborative, engaging research subjects in knowledge production and making that knowledge, however imperfect, available to them. One of the strengths of anthropology is that there are diverse voices and many ways of practicing it. As anthropologists, we work in and out of the academy, in various subfields and many regions of the world. We practice different modes of engagement or not. But where we come together is that we are all involved in a common endeavor of the study of humankind. And all of us have a role to play in imagining and perhaps enacting new possibilities for human society. Thank you. Thank you, but I'm about to get a present.
Okay, she wants a present, so we have to sit down. Thank you. Thank you, Leith, for showing us again in your inimitable, masterful way how our discipline does allow us to link alternative genealogies in ways that help illuminate the present and show us the way forward. And while you were very careful to focus on the United States, I think Bella and I would both agree that the stories that you've told us tonight are inspiring for no matter what context we work in. So now we begin the ritual exchange. I have two things to give you. First, a plaque, which I will read. No, you don't get it yet. Just a moment. It says, presented to Leith Mullings in recognition of her steadfast commitment to the mission of the American Anthropological Association and for her distinguished contribution to its program and services as President 2011-2013 and as President-elect 2009-2011.
Thank you.
And this will be a little less difficult to get into your purse, your bag. This is, it looks small, but you'll see what's inside it. Thank you very much. This is from everybody in the association with our deepest thanks.
Thank you. Nice envelope.
And there were co-conspirators involved.
Oh, nice card. Ooh. Thank you. This is a gift certificate to a jazz club. Wonderful. Great. So that I can relax.
That's right. That's the idea.
So now we come to the next portion, the final portion of this ritual, where I turn over the gavel to the new president, Monica Heller, who will be a wonderful president. Monica? Okay, done.
So that tapping closes the ritual exchange. It closes the event, and now we can all go party. Thank you very much for coming.